Hello, Professor Theisen. Um, I see your TA application form, okay, and I saw this question on there, which I thought was actually pretty interesting. I thought that was an interesting question. Because there's been one thing in this course, okay, that I think there's a gap in the explanation of the overall arc of how we've been going from quote unquote dumb AI to quote unquote smart AI, which is a whole different thing. I'm still mad that neural networks are just a big function that really ruined it for me. But I think more importantly, there's there's a gap. And I should have recorded this earlier this week when I was more enthusiastic and not sick. I'm a little sick right now, but I'll still try my best. So, you said when you started explaining like feature spaces and all of that you store these features in a super high dimensional space. And you made a big thing where you were like, we can show these in 2D and sometimes 3D, but we can't show it in 4D because you can't draw that. And in fact, you were even like, oh, if anyone can draw 4D, come up, be my guest. And it felt like my sleeper agent code was coming out. I was itching at myself. I was like, no, I can't do it. I already talked too much in this class. Because I had a little, I don't know, research, I guess. Not really, but I was into the cube, right? You know the Tesseract, the 4D cube? I made it in my Fun Comp final project. I guess pulling that up would be pretty cool, but whatever. I made a couple YouTube videos about that on this same channel, so I vaguely know what I'm talking about, and I think having this intuition would help with a lot of like the more intuitive parts of actually understanding how the AI works. Because here, let me build this up, right? So I've never used this pen before. I got it from my girlfriend just for this, so I'll see what I can do. You have like a 0D dot, right? You can have like a 1D line or a 2D plane or like a 3D kind of surface area or whatever. And if you notice, at least is the way I like it explained, the line here is actually just infinite numbers of the 0D points. Like you just have a bunch of points in a row, and then that will build up to the next dimension. And the same here. This is just a bunch of lines, you know. And the 3D, the cube, is just a bunch of planes stacked together, which is vaguely harder to draw. But if I do something like this and imagine there's infinite of them, it does actually turn into a cube, right? And the logical extension of this is taking a bunch of cubes and stacking them together, which can be done, but doesn't really look that great. I think a good way to do this, so you know how you like the typical cube drawing is something like this, where there's like some overlap. Let's simplify this so we have our cube now looks like this, where we get rid of that overlap. So this is my cube model for this explanation. What you can do to kind of draw out a 4D cube is you get two of these, right? And you can draw another one right here. And since they share this edge, they share a lot of edges, so this model I think looks a little bit better. I don't know if this is like an actual thing or if I came up with this in my video, but you can kind of connect these edges right here. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we get 1, 2, which shares, I guess, 3, 4. And that actually is a 4D cube. Like if this is a 3D cube, then this is what the 4D one would look like. And I think that's kind of important for this material, and I think it helps a lot. Because like with the decision surfaces, like you can have points in like a 4D feature space where you have, oh wow, where you have x, y, z, but you can also have a w. And I think explaining that this feature space is just 4 or n or whatever we're talking about axes with that are all 90 degrees apart. Like all of these are 90 degrees apart. And I think that's something that's not very intuitive, but helps a lot. Because that's why all the linear algebra works for AI, is because it's actually stored in a space where all the features are linearly independent, right? Because when you're drawing, in the 2D case, when you're drawing your decision boundary, right, it's like a line that like classifies between points up here and points down here. And I think you did a good job explaining how in 3D it's like a plane that like gets rid of points up here versus points down here. But I think it's a useful mental exercise to try and explain to these people that the decision boundary is just one dimension lower than the feature space. So in 4D it would be a 3D hyperplane, which is going to look really bad if I try and draw it here, but you can have... I need more space for this. How do I use this pen? No. Give me more space. You can have like 4 axes, and then you can have like a cube, right? Gotta draw the progression. Yeah, here we go. That's really bad. But you can have a cube where there's like some points in W over there and there's some points in W over here, and it's just one dimension lower than the feature space. And I don't know. I feel like that helps me intuitively with a lot of what's going on in AI, and I also think it's like the coolest part of what's going on in AI. And it also shows like a limitation, like ChatGPT's feature space is just like 3 trillion or whatever it is, and obviously you can't draw that. I mean, technically you could draw it, it would just be like really, it wouldn't make any sense, and it would just be lines everywhere because you're projecting too far down. But I think it's a good exercise to say like, yeah, you can draw these shapes and you can try and think about these higher dimensional feature spaces, and then when you're making your actual like classification or regression, it's just one dimension lower than the feature space you're in, and that will, I think that's a useful exercise. If any of this didn't make sense, I can redraw these shapes in person to you on a chalkboard or on a piece of paper, and it'll look much better. And if you're interested, I made like 2 or 3 fairly long videos on this topic back in freshman year when I took Calc 3 and linear algebra, and I was a freak and into this stuff. But anyways, thank you. Hope you pick me as an AI TA. Cool.